She kissed me in front of everyone, soft, deliberate, and cold. Her perfume lingered like a promise I didn't trust. "You'll thank me later, Alexander," Isabella whispered against my ear, her lips barely brushing my skin. Then she turned away, her diamond gown catching the gala lights like shards of ice. The Sterling Foundation ballroom hummed with applause and champagne laughter until a voice shattered the air. "Stop! Don't touch that!" The security chief's shout echoed through the hall. Conversations froze. Glasses halted midair. Every guest turned toward me, standing beside the centerpiece of the Eveninga crystal sculpture called the Heart of Glass. My fingertips hovered just an inch from it. I hadn't even realized I'd reached out. But the scanner embedded in the pedestal had already come to life, pulsing crimson. A cascade of alerts flashed across the massive LED screen behind the stage. Account numbers. Transfer codes. My name. Alexander Sterling, authorization confirmed. Gasps rippled through the room. Isabella stood at the balcony, one hand on a flute of champagne, smiling as if the performance was going exactly as rehearsed. And in that frozen moment, I finally understood the terrible thing my wife had just done. 3 hours earlier, before the lights, before the applause, before my wife turned me into the villain of her story, everything seemed almost ordinary. I had arrived at the Sterling Foundation's annual charity gala early, as I always did, preferring the quiet hum of preparation over the chaos of guests in black tie. The ballroom at the Langford Hotel smelled faintly of polish and orchids. Staff scurried across the marble floors, arranging crystal centerpieces and placing name cards embossed in gold. My name was printed at the far end of table 1, beside Isabella's. Alexander Sterling, retired architect. It was accurate but incomplete, like describing a storm as mild weather. I'd designed half the buildings within 5 blocks of this hotel. But since stepping down from Sterling Holdings 7 years ago, my reputation had faded into polite silence. My wife, however, had become the face of the empire, the philanthropist, the symbol of grace and generosity. And I, the quiet husband in tailored gray, had turned invisible. "Mr. Sterling," a young assistant called. "Mrs. Sterling wants to review the seating chart." "Of course she does," I murmured, following him toward the stage. Isabella stood beneath a chandelier of 1,000 crystals, her reflection fractured into light. She wore silver, always silver, as if color was beneath her. Even after 20 years of marriage, she still had that unnerving ability to fill an entire room just by existing. She glanced at me briefly, her smile perfectly rehearsed. "Darling," she said, the word balanced between affection and warning, "the reporters from the Chronicle will be here any minute. Try not to look bored this time." "I'll do my best," I replied. "You always say that." Her tone dipped slightly, "Only for me. You know, people still wonder what you do now. It might help if you looked a little more purposeful." "I build things," I said. "Just quieter ones." She tilted her head. "Yes, well, purpose doesn't pay for champagne." The assistant cleared his throat. "Mrs. Sterling, the sculpture's being delivered." "Excellent." Her eyes gleamed. "Alexander, you'll want to see this. It's called the Heart of Glass. Commissioned exclusively for tonight's auction. $12 million, all proceeds to the foundation." I followed her to the center of the room, where a team of men in gloves wheeled in a tall, glimmering piece encased in bulletproof glass. Beneath the lights, it looked alive, thousands of prisms swirling around a golden core. "It's stunning," I admitted. "It's symbolic," Isabella corrected. "Transparency, fragility, value. Everything this foundation stands for." She was rehearsing her speech already, turning charity into theater. As the staff unboxed the final cables, a man in a black suit approached Ethan Cross, our head of security. "Mrs. Sterling," he greeted with crisp professionalism. "The biometric system is fully operational. The sculpture's base includes a motion sensor and an ownership scanner, as requested. Ownership scanner. I looked at Isabella. That's new. A precaution, she said lightly. Given the value, we're using verification for anyone who touches the pedestal. Only registered donors and administrators can access it. I frowned. And my fingerprints are already in the system, she said. Don't worry. But her eyes didn't meet mine when she said it. Later, while the crew tested the lighting sequence, I walked out to the terrace for air. The city stretched below steel, glass, and rhythm, the heartbeat of everything I'd ever built. Victoria Hale called me then. Her voice, steady as ever. Alex, are you still going through with it? With what? You know exactly what, she said. The trust handover. Isabella filed the draft transfer this morning. She's moving all your intellectual property rights under her personal signature. You signed a temporary authorization, didn't you? I did, I admitted. God, Alexander. She can't just. She can, I said quietly. If I let her. There was silence on the line. Then, you're planning something. I'm planning to stop pretending. Be careful. She's not the woman you married. I know, I said, staring at the city I'd helped raise. But she's about to remember who I am. When I returned inside, Isabella was rehearsing her speech at the podium, voice smooth, confident. Tonight, she practiced, we celebrate generosity. We honor those who give selflessly. And most importantly, we prove that even the strongest hearts are made of glass. Applause echoed from a few staff members. She smiled. Perfect. Alexander, what do you think? I met her gaze. I think, I said, you should be very careful with glass. It breaks easily. Her lips curved, but her eyes stayed cold. Then let's hope it doesn't cut you first. The orchestra began tuning in the background, the ballroom filling with the promise of elegance and danger. In that glittering cage of wealth and mirrors, my wife was preparing a show and I, apparently, was the opening act. The gala began with the usual choreography of high society, waiters gliding through the crowd like clockwork, laughter rising above the violins, photographers orbiting around Isabella as if she were the sun itself. I stood at the edge of it all, a ghost among my own guests. Every year, this same performance unfolded: the lights, the speeches, the flattery. Only this time, something felt off. The air was too controlled, the timing too perfect, as if everyone but me knew their role in a play I hadn't read. From across the room, Isabella raised her champagne glass and caught my eye. Her smile was dazzling, flawless. To the cameras, it looked like devotion. To me, it was a warning. Victoria's voice echoed in my head, she's moving everything under her name. I excused myself from a group of donors and walked toward the side hall where the foundation's administrative offices were. The door was ajar. Inside, two men in suits were sorting through folders under Isabella's direction. Her tone was brisk, businesslike. These are the updated trust documents, she said. Make sure they're signed and notarized before the keynote. One of the men, a lawyer I didn't recognize, asked, will Mr. Sterling be present for the signing? He'll be there, Isabella replied without looking up. He always does what's asked of him. The words landed like a knife between my ribs. I cleared my throat from the doorway. Should I be flattered or concerned? Isabella turned, startled for only a second before recovering her composure. Alexander. Perfect timing. The two men exchanged glances and quietly slipped out, leaving us alone with the papers. She lifted a sleek folder from the desk. These are just routine formalities, she said, her tone honeyed but sharp. Legal language. Tax efficiencies. You don't need to read every page. I always read every page, I replied, accepting the folder. Inside were 30 pages of dense legal text, that kind of document designed to bury truth in polite terminology. The first line that caught my attention froze me. Transfer of intellectual property and residual rights from A. Sterling to I. Sterling, effective immediately. Interesting routine formality, I murmured. You're moving my patents, copyrights, and architectural licenses into your trust. She smiled faintly. Our trust. I'm simply streamlining things. It'll make approvals smoother. For you, I said. Don't start this again, Alex, she sighed. You know how exhausting it is to explain everything to you. I suppose it must be difficult, I said evenly, having a husband who still reads what he signs. Her expression flickered, half annoyance, half calculation. If you want to look useful tonight, sign them. The donors will be watching during the presentation. You'll look involved. Is this about appearances or ownership? She leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. At this level, they're the same thing. She slid a pen across the desk. Just sign. For a moment, I considered refusing. Then I remembered Victoria's advice and ignored it. I signed, carefully, deliberately, with a flourish. Isabella smiled in victory. Thank you, darling, she said. You've made everything so much easier. When she left, the echo of her heels followed me like a ticking clock. I sat alone for a few minutes, staring at the document I'd just signed. To the untrained eye, I just handed over my life's work. But to someone who understood the Foundation's charter, the gesture meant something else entirely. Years ago, when I created Sterling Holdings, I'd built a hidden clause into its legal DNA: any transfer of intellectual property or ownership rights required dual biometric confirmation from both signatories. One signature wasn't enough. And tonight, Isabella had just given me her biometric confirmation by requesting those forms. She thought she'd outsmarted me. In reality, she'd authenticated her own fraud. Back in the ballroom, she was radiant again, accepting compliments, posing for photographs, whispering into the ears of board members. When I rejoined her, she greeted me with a public smile that could melt steel. Everyone's asking about you, she said sweetly. Try to look proud for once. You're married to a woman who's saving the world. I'm proud, I said. I just hope the world remembers who built the ground it stands on. The photographer snapped another flash. Isabella leaned into me, smiling for the camera. Still living in the past, Alex, she murmured between her teeth. I'm the future. Then be careful not to fall off the edge of it, I whispered back. For a split second, the smile faltered. Then she turned to greet another guest, leaving me in the reflected glare of her performance. From across the room, I caught sight of Victoria Hale near the registration desk. She gave me a small nod, as if to say, "You've started the clock." Yes, I had. The papers were signed, the stage set, the actors in place. And all that was left now was to let the play run until the final curtain fell. By the time the clock above the ballroom mantel struck 7, the guests had nearly doubled. Laughter echoed off the vaulted ceiling, mixing with the murmur of money, that soft, expensive sound only the rich can make when they feel safe. But I wasn't safe. Not tonight. I found myself near the bar, staring at my reflection in a glass of scotch I hadn't touched. From across the room, Isabella was radiant in her silver gown, floating between tables with perfect composure. She was telling stories about our projects, our shared vision, our partnership in building a better world. Every word was true in grammar, false in spirit. It wasn't partnership. It was takeover. Mr. Sterling, said a voice at my elbow. I turned to see Lucas Grant, the young blockchain engineer we'd hired last year. His suit was too big, his nervousness too visible. Lucas, I greeted. You look uncomfortable. He lowered his voice. Sir, may I speak with you privately? I nodded and led him toward a quieter alcove behind the marble columns. What's wrong? There's something strange in the system, he whispered. The financial node that links the Foundation's donation network to Sterling Holdings's been rerouted. All transactions are being duplicated through a private server. My stomach tightened. Whose server? He hesitated. Mrs. Sterling's. I closed my eyes for a moment. Are you certain? I traced the IP twice. It's locked behind 3 layers of encryption, but the authorization keys come directly from her administrative profile. If someone moves money tonight, it'll look like you did it. There it was. The shape of her trap. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Lucas, listen carefully. Don't change anything. Don't shut it down. Just observe. He looked terrified. Sir, if this is fraud. It's proof, I said. But proof only matters when everyone's watching. When he left, I lingered alone in the shadows, watching Isabella laugh beneath the chandelier. Around her, the crowd shimmered like orbiting satellites drawn to light, unaware it burns. My phone vibrated. Victoria. You need to leave, she texted. Now. She's about to go public with the transfer. You're signing away your entire portfolio live on stage. I typed back, not yet. Let her finish the act. A waiter passed, offering hors d'oeuvres. I waved him off. My pulse thudded like distant thunder. Somewhere between the toasts and the photo ops, I realized what truly frightened me wasn't the money. It was how easily she'd convinced everyone, investors, journalists, even friends, that she was the architect of everything I'd built. 7 years ago, when I stepped down, I'd told myself I was tired of running the machine. In truth, I was tired of fighting the ego that had grown beside me. Isabella had always needed to be admired. Admiration was her oxygen, control, her heartbeat. I had once found that fire intoxicating. Tonight it was lethal. At 7:30, Ethan Cross, the security chief, approached with 2 guards in tow. Mr. Sterling, he said, polite but formal. Mrs. Sterling requested that you stay near the stage area once the keynote begins. For photo coordination. Of course, I said, masking my suspicion. Tell me, Ethan, how's the new biometric scanner working? He straightened slightly, proud of his domain. Perfectly, sir. Only authorized profiles can trigger the access display. And mine is authorized? Yes, sir. Mrs. Sterling verified both hers and yours this afternoon. I smiled faintly. Good. That means when it lights up, it won't lie. He blinked, uncertain whether that was a compliment or a warning. As he walked away, I glanced at the enormous glass sculpture, the heart of glass gleaming under a halo of blue light. Beneath its transparent surface, faint streams of code ran along the pedestal display, visible only to those who knew where to look. It wasn't just art. It was an interactive terminal, a live portal to the Foundation's financial network. If Isabella was planning to move assets, she'd do it here, in public, dramatized as symbolic philanthropy. Perfect optics. Perfect deception. And when the system registered a fingerprint, it would announce that fingerprint's name to the entire audience. I exhaled slowly, the realization cutting through me like frost. She'd scripted everything. I'd reach out to steady the sculpture, polite gesture, public stage, and in that moment, my biometric ID would activate the transfer she'd already set in motion. My name would appear on every screen, confirming Alexander Sterling as the source of the unauthorized transaction. A trap built with elegance and precision, my wife's specialty. But she'd made one miscalculation. The security scanner had a dual authentication echo. Every activation created a mirror record in a private log file, and I still owned that log. I checked my watch. 20 minutes until the keynote. 20 minutes until Isabella tried to erase me in front of Manhattan's elite. Victoria texted again, Alex, you're scaring me. What's the plan? I typed back, same as always. Build something that lasts even if I have to break it first. As the orchestra began its overture, I straightened my tie, took one last look at the woman who had once been my muse, and whispered to myself, let the glass shine. The storm was about to begin. By 8 o'clock, the ballroom of the Langford Hotel had transformed into a cathedral of wealth. Chandeliers glowed like constellations, reflecting off the mirrored walls. The air carried the perfume of champagne and polished ambition. Photographers swarmed like hornets. And at the center of it all stood Isabella Sterling, in silver silk and calculated confidence, smiling for every flash that caught her diamond hand resting lightly on the heart of glass. She was in her element, queen of the evening, architect of illusion. I stood just beyond the spotlight, half-shadowed near the orchestra, watching her command the room with a grace that had once disarmed me. Every laugh, every tilt of her head, every perfectly measured word, all part of a symphony she had composed for her own glory. The MC stepped up to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, please welcome the visionary leader of the Sterling Foundation, Mrs. Isabella Sterling. Applause thundered. Isabella took the stage as if it were built for her alone. Good evening, she began, her voice smooth as crystal. Tonight, we gather not only to celebrate generosity, but to prove that compassion and innovation can reshape the world. The words washed over the crowd, rich and meaningless. She gestured toward the sculpture beside her, a tower of light and glass gleaming under the spotlights. This, she said, represents transparency, strength, and above all, trust. Trust, I thought bitterly. I had once believed she understood that word. But to her, trust was not a bond, it was a tool. Something to exploit. The crowd leaned in as Isabella continued, her voice rising with theatrical warmth. Tonight, we make history. The Sterling Foundation will merge with our global partners under a single network. And as a symbol of unity, we will transfer ownership of our most valuable assets into a shared trust, one that will outlive us all. Cameras clicked. Applause swelled. I felt the weight of eyes turning toward me. The husband. The donor. The signature she needed to make this look legitimate. Alexander, Isabella called sweetly, darling, would you join me on stage? Her tone was sugar. Her smile, poison. I straightened my jacket and walked through the maze of tables. As I climbed the steps to the stage, I caught sight of Victoria Hale standing discreetly at the back, phone in hand, recording everything. Her expression was taut, she knew exactly what was about to happen. Here he is, Isabella said, wrapping an arm around mine for the cameras. My husband. My partner. The man whose vision started it all. Flashbulbs exploded. The audience murmured in admiration. If they only knew. Alexander, she said, voice projecting over the microphone, would you do us the honor of initiating the ceremonial activation? The activation? I repeated quietly. The transfer, she whispered through her smile. The heart of glass responds only to your touch. I understood then, this was the moment. She had set the stage so elegantly. I was meant to play the part of the generous husband, touching the sculpture to symbolize our donation. The scanner embedded in its pedestal would register my fingerprint, trigger the hidden financial transfer, and flash my name across the LED display, framing me as the one who had rerouted funds. Isabella leaned closer, her breath sweet with champagne. Don't hesitate, she murmured. Everyone's watching. She was right. Every gaze in the room was fixed on me. Every camera trained on the glittering sculpture. I smiled, a calm, polite curve of the mouth that had taken me years to perfect. Of course, my dear. As I reached for the glass surface, I saw Ethan Cross shift uneasily by the security booth, hand hovering near his radio. He didn't know why, but instinct told him something was wrong. My fingers brushed the cool surface of the sculpture. The biometric light blinked to life blue, then red. Beep. A ripple of digital sound spread through the speakers. The LED wall behind the stage flickered once, twice, then blazed with code. Transaction IDs. Account ledgers. And then, my name. Alexander Sterling, authorization confirmed. Gasps broke through the applause. The light from the screens painted the crowd in electric blue as numbers streamed like rainfall, millions, then tens of millions, moving through networks faster than the eye could follow. Someone shouted, "What's happening?" Another voice yelled, "Security. Check the feed." Ethan raised his hand to his earpiece. "Stop the data transfer. Lock the servers." But it was too late. The images raced on, unstoppable. And through it all, Isabella stood motionless beside me, her expression angelic, almost innocent. "Alex," she said softly for the microphone, her voice trembling with feigned concern, "what did you do?" I turned to her, my throat dry. "What did you do?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. From the audience, someone whispered, "Is that money being stolen?" Another voice answered, "His name's on it, it's his authorization." Exactly as she wanted. The air thickened. My pulse beat like a drum. Security guards closed in from both sides, unsure whether to arrest or protect me. Ethan's voice cut through the confusion, "No one touches the sculpture until we isolate the signal." That was when it happened, the exact second the room froze in disbelief. A blaring alarm erupted from the security terminal, and Ethan shouted over the noise. "Stop! Don't touch that." The same words that would echo through my memory hours later. I jerked my hand back instinctively. The scanner light faded from red to amber. Silence descended. Isabella turned to the crowd, eyes wide in theatrical shock. "My husband has been under great stress," she said softly. "Perhaps we should." But her words died as Victoria's voice boomed from the back of the hall, "Leave it running." Every head turned. Victoria stepped forward, holding up her phone. "Keep that display active, Ethan. The world deserves to see everything." The LED wall froze on the most damning image of all, a real-time balance sheet of the Sterling Foundation's offshore accounts, complete with access logs showing who had initiated the reroute. It was my name on the main file. But another tag blinked just below it. Secondary authorization, Isabella Sterling. The audience gasped again, louder this time. And though the night was far from over, the performance was beginning to unravel. Isabella's smile faltered for the first time. Her perfect mask had cracked. For a few seconds, nobody breathed. The ballroom, once alive with laughter and champagne, had become a pressure chamber, filled only with the low hum of the LED screens and the staccato clicks of security keyboards trying to keep up. My name glowed in bold white letters, "Alexander Sterling, authorization confirmed." And beneath it, that second line pulsed like a heartbeat, "Secondary authorization, Isabella Sterling." 2 names. 1 crime. Isabella turned toward me slowly, the practiced grace still there, but the certainty gone. For a woman who'd built her life on controlling every glance, every breath, this was her first taste of unpredictability, and she hated it. "This is a mistake," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "Ethan, shut down the display." The head of security hesitated. "Ma'am, we can't. The system's locked in audit mode." "Then override it," she snapped, the composure cracking. "Mrs. Sterling," said Lucas Grant from the tech terminal, voice shaking but steady enough for the microphone to catch. "The audit mode was triggered by your fingerprint and Mr. Sterling's combined access. It can't be stopped until the verification cycle ends." She spun toward him, eyes flashing. "Who authorized that feature?" Lucas swallowed hard. "You did, ma'am, when you approved the biometric encryption 6 months ago." The irony was exquisite. I watched her face shift from anger to calculation, then to something colder, denial. The audience, sensing blood, leaned forward. Phones began recording again. Wealthy people loved spectacle even when it was a scandal. Especially when it wasn't theirs. Alexander, Isabella said, her voice trembling just enough to seem human. Why would you do this? Why would you humiliate me? I stared at her. Humiliate you? You've spent years building a world where only one of us existed. Don't be dramatic, she hissed under her breath. You're ruining everything. No, Isabella, I said softly. I'm finishing it. The crowd murmured, a sea of whispers rippling through silk and sequins. The spotlight above the stage flickered slightly, as if it too was deciding whose truth to illuminate. From the corner of my eye, I saw Victoria Hale step closer, expression sharp and calm. Ethan, she called out. Bring up the ownership metadata. It should show where the transaction originated. Ethan hesitated, glancing at Isabella, then at me. Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Sterling, I'll need verbal consent from both of you. Do it, I said. No. Isabella barked, too quickly. This is an internal matter. I won't have my husband's confusion broadcast to the world. The murmur grew louder. Someone near the front whispered, confusion. He looks pretty clear to me. Victoria didn't wait. She strode to the tech console, heels clicking like gunshots, and pointed to the upper right corner of the display. Lucas, extract the transaction path. Lucas' fingers flew over the keyboard. Within seconds, lines of digital code began to unravel across the giant screen: source IDs, IP traces, server names. And then came the reveal. Initiating device, Executive Terminal Sterling Foundation HQ. User, Isabella.Sterling.admin. Secondary echo, Alexander.Sterling mirrored authorization. The room erupted. People gasped, some shouted. The board members exchanged horrified looks. Investors checked their phones as if money could vanish just by proximity to guilt. Isabella froze, her lips parting slightly. That's impossible. I turned to her. Is it? Her eyes darted between me and the screen, searching for a narrative she could spin. This is a setup, she said finally. You've manipulated the system somehow. You must have. Of course, I said evenly. Because the best traps are the ones the prey helps design. You're lying. Am I? I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough for the front rows to lean in. You thought I didn't know about the private server, the ghost accounts, the offshore reroutes through your shell foundations in Geneva and Dubai. You thought your mirrored transactions would vanish inside the foundation's humanitarian facade. But you forgot one thing, Isabella. She swallowed, voice barely audible. What? I built the system. Her expression shattered a flicker of shock, then realization, then fury. You engineered this? I engineered everything. Including the clause that requires dual authorization to trigger audit mode. That's why the system's locked, she whispered. I nodded. You wanted spectacle. I just gave it to you with subtitles. Laughter, awkward, nervous, half-believing, rippled through the crowd. Even the orchestra had gone still, instruments hanging midair like unanswered questions. Isabella stepped back, her voice rising. This is outrageous. You're destroying our reputation. Our reputation died the moment you tried to sell it, I said. She turned to the audience, desperation lacing her tone. You all know me. You've seen what we've built. This man, she pointed at me, has been unstable for years. Paranoid. He sees betrayal everywhere. Her voice trembled, the edges fraying. She was losing them, and she knew it. That's when Margaret Devereux, the board chair, stood. Her calm presence cut through the chaos like a blade. Mrs. Sterling, she said firmly, as of this moment, the Foundation's board suspends your executive privileges pending investigation. The entire room went silent again. Isabella blinked. Margaret, you can't. I can, Margaret said coolly. Your fingerprints and your network credentials confirm you initiated unauthorized transfers. Until this is resolved, you are no longer to access Foundation systems. Isabella looked around wildly for support, for sympathy, for anything. But no one met her gaze. For the first time that night, I saw her not as the woman I'd married, not as the empire she pretended to embody, but as a frightened stranger trapped by her own performance. She whispered, almost to herself, "You planned this. From the beginning." "No," I said softly. "From the moment you stopped seeing me as your husband and started seeing me as your obstacle." Her jaw tightened. "You'll regret this, Alexander." "Possibly," I said. "But at least I'll remember who I am." Security stepped forward quietly, waiting for Margaret's cue. Isabella drew herself upright, the last remnants of dignity clinging to her posture. "You think you've won?" she said, voice brittle as the sculpture beside us. "There's no victory here," I replied. "Only truth. And glass doesn't lie." I turned toward the heart of glass, its golden core flickering with residual light. For a moment, it looked almost human, fragile, beautiful, and fatally transparent. Then the pedestal emitted one last chime, and the LED wall froze on a final message. Audit complete, transactions reversed. Every dollar she had tried to move had been rerouted back into the Foundation's official trust, sealed under dual biometric control, mine and Margaret's. The audience broke into applause, hesitant at first, then growing louder, echoing through the marble hall like thunder. I didn't bow. I didn't smile. I simply looked at Isabella, who stood rigid and pale under the glare of her own spotlight, and whispered the line she'd once said to me years ago when power was still hers. "Careful with glass, my love. It cuts both ways." Then I walked off the stage, leaving her to the shards of her kingdom. The applause didn't sound like victory to me. It sounded like an avalanche, loud, unstoppable, and indifferent to whoever stood beneath it. As I stepped down from the stage, flashes from cameras followed like tracer fire. The same guests who toasted Isabella an hour earlier were now whispering into their phones, calling lawyers, gossiping to journalists. Manhattan's elite were scavengers in designer suits, they smelled blood and opportunity in equal measure. At the far end of the ballroom, Victoria Hale intercepted me, her face pale but resolute. "You timed it perfectly," she whispered. "I didn't time anything," I said quietly. "I just stopped hiding." She smiled faintly. "That's still strategy." Behind us, chaos reigned. Isabella Sterling stood frozen under the lights, a statue made of panic. 2 security guards had gently taken position nearby, not touching her, just waiting. Margaret Devereux was speaking in hushed tones with the board members. Reporters from the Chronicle and the Ledger were already raising microphones. "Mr. Sterling. Is it true you engineered the dual authorization? Did you set up your wife?" I turned to them calmly. "No. I set up a system designed to protect our Foundation from misuse. She chose to misuse it. The system simply did its job." Click. Flash. Whisper. Someone muttered, "That's going to be tomorrow's headline." Victoria touched my arm. "You need to step away from the floor, Alex. Let Margaret handle the press." I nodded and allowed her to lead me toward the side corridor, where the noise dimmed. We passed the heart of glass one last time. Its surface was spiderwebbed with hairline cracks, delicate fractures from the heat of the lights and the shock of the data surge. It still glittered beautifully, but it was broken. So was my marriage. A half hour later, the ballroom had emptied of guests. Only the inner circle remained: Margaret, Victoria, Ethan Cross, Lucas Grant, and me. Isabella sat in one of the front row chairs, her shoulders hunched, her phone still in her hand but useless. Her mascara had started to run, tiny streaks of ink against porcelain skin. She looked smaller without her stage. Margaret spoke first. Mrs. Sterling, the Foundation's legal team will request a full forensic audit of all transactions within the last 6 months. Until that's complete, you are suspended from all operations. Isabella didn't look up. And what about my shares? Victoria answered gently, the Foundation is non-profit. You can't own its shares, Isabella. But the holdings tied to your personal trust, that's a different story. Those will need to be verified for source legality. Her voice sharpened. Are you accusing me of theft? I spoke then, quietly. You accused yourself, Isabella. You signed every authorization. You touched every key. The system remembers fingerprints even when people forget morality. She finally turned toward me, her eyes no longer cold but wild. You humiliated me in front of everyone. You destroyed me. No, I said. You built your empire on deception. It collapsed under its own weight. Ethan cleared his throat. Sir, for procedural reasons, we'll need you both to come with us to the security office to finalize statements. Law enforcement has been notified. Her face drained of color. You called the police. I didn't, I said. The system did. Automatic trigger for financial crimes above 20 million. That was the final crack. Her composure shattered like the glass sculpture behind her. She stood abruptly, shaking. You think you've won, don't you? You think this makes you the hero? I don't believe in heroes, I said. Only consequences. The security office was small, dim, and blessedly quiet. A glass wall separated it from the rest of the staff corridor. Ethan worked silently at the terminal, collecting access logs. Margaret was on a conference call with the board's attorneys. Isabella sat opposite me, her hands folded in her lap. For the first time in years, there was no polish in her voice, just exhaustion. I loved you once, Alex, she said. I looked at her, unsure whether to believe it. You loved control. You just confused it with affection. She gave a short, bitter laugh. Maybe I did. Maybe I thought if I built something big enough, powerful enough, people would stop looking at you like the genius and start looking at me. I frowned. Is that what this was about? Credit? It was about being seen, she whispered. You disappeared into your quiet world, designing buildings nobody knew were yours. I wanted light. You wanted shadows. I couldn't live in them anymore. Her words were softer than I expected, and for a moment I almost pitied her. Almost. But pity didn't erase betrayal. Do you know what I learned tonight, Isabella? I said. That light can be just as blinding as darkness. You stood under those chandeliers so long, you forgot how to see the ground beneath you. She looked at me with eyes that were suddenly very human, very tired. So what happens now? I glanced at Ethan. He met my gaze and nodded. The authorities are en route. You'll need to make a statement, ma'am. You can have counsel present. Isabella laughed again, hollow, almost childlike. A lawyer. Right. Because that fixes everything. Victoria stepped forward, arms crossed. Isabella, I'm sorry it came to this. But actions have weight. You can't defraud your husband and your foundation and expect applause. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Isabella whispered, he planned it all. Every second. I didn't deny it. I planned protection, not destruction. You chose the rest. When Ethan's phone buzzed, he listened, then said quietly, the authorities are downstairs. We'll bring them up through the service elevator. I nodded. Give her a moment. He hesitated, then left the room. Isabella's eyes filled, not with rage now, but regret. You could have just told me you knew. And what would that have changed? She exhaled shakily. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. The moment she was escorted away was strangely quiet. No handcuffs, no shouting, just a single woman in a silver gown walking past the reflection of the heart of glass, fractured and fading. Margaret joined me afterward. "You did the right thing, Alex," she said softly. "I didn't do it for right or wrong," I replied. "I did it for truth." She nodded. "Still, truth tends to sting." Victoria entered a few minutes later, holding her phone. "The news broke," she said. "The Chronicle just posted the story. The board's already drafting a statement clearing your name." "Good," I said. "Let them." "What about you?" she asked. "What happens now?" I looked through the glass wall toward the ballroom where the lights were dimming, the tables half cleared, the sculpture flickering in its case. "I suppose I rebuild. It's what I've always done." "Rebuild what?" "Whatever's left." She smiled faintly. "You always did have a talent for turning ruins into blueprints." I didn't answer. My gaze lingered on the empty stage, where Isabella had once stood glowing under the chandeliers. Now only dust and reflection remained. Hours later, as dawn painted the Manhattan skyline gold, I walked out of the Langford Hotel into the crisp morning air. Reporters had gathered by the entrance, but I passed them wordlessly. My driver opened the door, and as I slid into the car, I caught a final glimpse of the hotel facade, glass and marble gleaming like truth after a storm. The city looked different now, not new, just honest. I leaned back in my seat, the exhaustion finally catching up. In my pocket, my phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. From Isabella. "You built walls to protect yourself. You forgot that sometimes love lives outside them." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message. Love built walls. Truth broke them. And I had finally learned which one I could live with. 3 weeks is a long time in Manhattan. Empires have fallen faster. By the time the headlines softened from scandal to analysis, the foundation had a new interim charter, a new compliance committee, and thanks to Marguerite a new rule named after me, the Sterling Clause, requiring independent audit triggers any time executive authority touches restricted funds. The board voted unanimously. No dissent. Fear makes for efficient governance. I didn't attend the vote. I was across town in a glass-walled conference room that pretended to be neutral ground, Victoria on my right, a court-appointed mediator at the head, and Isabella opposite me with a lawyer whose cufflinks looked more expensive than his arguments. She wore black. Not theatrical this time, subdued, almost human. The silver had vanished from her wardrobe, the spotlight from her posture. When our eyes met, there was no fury left. Only the gravity that follows a storm. The mediator cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss 3 things, the foundation's operational separation, the disposition of marital assets, and any protective orders either party seeks." Isabella's lawyer began with a performance. She had suffered reputational harm, she had contributed immeasurably to the foundation's public profile, she had been misled by technical systems beyond her expertise. I let him finish lying politely. When he sat down, Victoria slid a thin folder across the table. Timeline of authorizations. Fingerprints. Server keys. Offshore shells. Your client is not a passenger in the car, she's the one who stole it. The mediator raised a calming hand. We're not assigning criminal liability here. No, I said. The system already did. Silence hummed. Outside, taxis stitched yellow lines through the afternoon. Inside, I felt the old architect's instinct return, measure twice, cut once. I'm not here to win, I said finally. I'm here to draw lines. The mediator nodded. Your terms, Mr. Sterling. First, I said, Isabella resigns permanently from any position at the foundation or its affiliates. She may volunteer elsewhere. She may not raise money using the Sterling name. Isabella's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Second, I continued, she returns anything acquired with rerouted funds personally or through proxies. The foundation will accept a no-fault statement for optics. But the assets come home. Her lawyer scribbled. And in exchange? I looked at Isabella. I won't contest her personal accounts or the apartment on Delancey. Keep it. Sell it. Fill it with chandeliers. I don't care. She lifted her eyes, surprised. Why? Because I'm not interested in punishing you with furniture, I said. Punishment doesn't build anything. The mediator's pen paused. Protective orders. Victoria leaned in. Mutual non-disparagement. No memoirs, no podcasts, no docuseries. If either party breaches, liquidated damages go to the foundation's housing program. Isabella's lawyer started to object. She touched his sleeve and shook her head. It's fine, she murmured. Say yes. He blinked, then nodded tightly. We accept. The mediator exhaled, relieved by the scent of agreement. Papers shuffled. Signatures landed. Boundaries took legal shape. When the session ended, Isabella lingered as the others filed out. The room felt larger with fewer people, fewer illusions. You didn't have to give me the apartment, she said quietly. I know. You could have taken everything. No, I said. You already tried that. A shadow of humor touched her mouth. Then it faded. I was wrong about you, she admitted. I thought you hid because you were afraid. You hid because you were protecting something. Not a secret, I said. A standard. She looked at her hands. What am I supposed to do with my life now? I thought of the cracked sculpture, beautiful even in failure. Maybe start with something that doesn't need applause to stand. She nodded once, a small, almost reverent motion. Goodbye, Alexander. Goodbye, Isabella. She left without perfume or cameras. The door clicked shut, and the room held its breath, as if waiting to see what shape the air would take without her. The days found their rhythm. Ethan Cross assumed a permanent role as Director of Security and Integrity, his title, his pride. Lucas moved into a new lab we built above the foundation's warehouse. He named the server Heartwood, because glass breaks and wood bends, and strength isn't always shiny. Margaret called me to the stage I had tried to avoid. You don't have to speak, she said, but sometimes the builder needs to show the blueprint. So I stood in front of a smaller crowd, no chandeliers this time, just fluorescent honesty, and laid out what the foundation would do next: repair housing, not headlines, fund mentors, not galas, publish every ledger in a language the public could read. The applause felt different. Warmer. Less electric, more human. Afterward, a janitor kin by temperament stopped me in the corridor and said, "It's good to see a man keep working when the cameras go home." I shook his hand like a ceremony. A week later, I visited the ballroom at the Langford. The staff had already removed the stage and boxed the lights. The heart of glass sat under soft conservation lamps, fractures mapped with delicate gold lines where the restorers had practiced kintsugi, the art of mending with precious seams. Not invisible repairs? I asked. The conservator smiled. We decided to honor the break. I ran a finger along the golden vein, humble and bright. Good choice. On my way out, I paused at the threshold and looked back. The room that had tried to swallow me now looked like an empty studio waiting for a new plan. I could almost hear pencil on vellum, the first line of a future drawn without spectacle. My phone buzzed. A message from Victoria: board approved the Housing First Fund. You named it yet? I typed, blueprints. She replied with a single checkmark, the kind architects use when a problem has been solved without drama. That night, I walked the High Line alone. Wind threaded the old rails, carrying the rust-sweet scent of history and the warm spill of windows where strangers were making dinners, mistakes, and ordinary miracles. The city glowed like a circuit board, power flowing where design allowed it, darkness where it didn't. At the overlook, I stopped. Below me, a delivery cyclist leaned his bike against a pillar and helped an elderly man carry groceries up a stubborn flight of stairs. No cameras. No donors. Just weight and hands. I thought of Isabella saying she wanted light while I wanted shadows. She wasn't wrong. I do prefer shadows, places where work happens without a spotlight, where the measure of a thing is how long it stands after applause dies. Boundaries, I realized, aren't walls. They're load-bearing lines. They don't separate life, they keep it from collapsing. My phone buzzed again. A number I didn't recognize. A photo arrived, a single library card, new, with a black dress sleeve in the corner. No text. Just the picture. I smiled despite myself. Then I put the phone away, turned toward home, and let the night carry me quiet, unfinished, strong where it needed to be. Tomorrow I would draft the first site plan for blueprints. Not a monument. A foundation. Low, wide, true. Enough glass. It was time to build with something that could hold a life. 6 months later, the city looked different, not because it had changed, but because I had. Manhattan's skyline still glimmered like ambition carved in glass, but I no longer measured worth by reflection. The sterling foundation, reborn under a new charter, had taken on a quieter purpose. We'd sold the Langford ballroom too much history in those chandeliers and used the proceeds to buy 3 neglected brownstones in Brooklyn. The new sign read Blueprints Housing Initiative. No marble, no champagne. Just steady work. Every morning, I arrived early, coffee in hand, sleeves rolled up. The team knew me simply as Alex, not Mr. Sterling. Some of them still whispered about the scandal that had rocked the old foundation, but most didn't care. To them, I was another pair of hands helping lay insulation, reviewing wiring plans, checking blueprints. The walls smelled like sawdust and hope. "Careful with that beam," Lucas called one morning. "If it shifts, the whole frame loses alignment." "Story of my life," I muttered. He laughed. "You think you're funny, but you're quoting the design manual." Victoria appeared from the stairwell with her tablet, a streak of paint on her sleeve. "I'm leaving for the city council meeting. They're voting on our zoning exemption. Will it pass?" I asked. "If it doesn't, I'll make them regret it." I smiled. "That's why I keep you around." "You keep me around because I don't let you brood," she shot back. "You've had 6 months of silence. That's enough." She wasn't wrong. Silence can heal, but it can also harden. I was still learning the difference. The first blueprint site opened that winter, 12 affordable apartments for single parents and veterans. No press release, no ribbon cutting. Just a handwritten sign that read, "Welcome home." When the first residents moved in, I stood in the hallway pretending to inspect the fixtures while they carried boxes upstairs. One young mother paused to catch her breath. "You work here?" she asked. "I do." She smiled. "Good. You build solid walls." "My son's going to sleep soundly for the first time in a year." That was all the recognition I needed. Later that evening, when the building went quiet, I climbed to the rooftop. From there, I could see the city alive, restless, merciless, beautiful. The skyline was still glass and metal, but beneath it lay something sturdier, people trying, failing, rebuilding. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a man who'd lost something. I felt like a man who'd reclaimed something invisible. In February, I received a letter handwritten, elegant, and signed, but unmistakably hers. "Alexander. I won't pretend I deserve forgiveness. I don't. But I wanted you to know that the investigation has closed. No charges. Only shame, and lessons. I've started volunteering at the city's literacy center. It's quieter than I expected. Sometimes the children ask me why I look sad when I read them stories. I tell them I'm practicing. For what? They ask. For telling better ones, I say. You were right about glass. It doesn't lie. But it does reflect, and sometimes reflection hurts. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into the desk drawer, and didn't reply. Some things are better left as echoes. Spring arrived with rain that smelled like metal and soil. Blueprints expanded to a second site in Queens. Ethan Cross ran operations like a soldier turned saint. Margaret had retired, but she visited once a month with baked scones and unsolicited advice. You finally look like a man who built something that can't be stolen, she said one afternoon. Let's hope it stays that way. She gave me that sharp Devereaux smile. Nothing stays. That's why we keep building. Later that day, I found myself back at the Langford Hotel. The ballroom had been gutted, its luxury stripped to bare beams. But the heart of glass remained, restored and repurposed. It stood in the lobby of the Metropolitan Museum, labeled. The Heart of Glass, Restored 2025. Donated anonymously. Kintsugi Restoration gold-filled fractures representing resilience and truth. I stood there for a long time, tracing the golden seams. The cracks glowed softly under museum light, and I realized something I hadn't before: the sculpture wasn't ruined. It was reborn. Not despite the damage but because of it. I thought about the night Isabella kissed my forehead, whispering, "You'll thank me later." Maybe, in her twisted way, she'd been right. Because without that fall, I might never have rebuilt myself. The following Sunday, I hosted dinner at my apartment for the foundation staff. No formal dining set, no waiters, just takeout boxes and laughter that filled the corners like light. Lucas clinked his glass. To rebuilding. Victoria smirked. To boundaries. Ethan added, to second chances. I raised mine last. To truth. The kind that cuts, then heals. They nodded. Glasses met. After dinner, I walked Victoria to the door. Rain had started again, soft and persistent. She looked at me and said, "You're smiling. That's new." "I think it's called peace," I said. She grinned. "Don't get too comfortable. Peace is fragile." "So is glass," I replied. "But look how it shines." She laughed, waved, and disappeared into the city. That night, I stood by my window, watching droplets race down the glass like tiny comets. Manhattan shimmered below, bright, restless, alive. Somewhere out there, Isabella was probably reading bedtime stories to strangers' children. And that was enough. Some stories end with justice. Some end with forgiveness. Mine ended with both, and the understanding that strength doesn't come from what survives untouched, but from what endures after being broken. I pressed my palm to the cold windowpane. The reflection looking back at me wasn't the mogul or the victim. It was just a man, hands scarred from rebuilding, eyes calm from seeing too much, heart steady again. And for the first time since that night in the ballroom, I whispered to the city that had watched it all. Thank you. Not to her. Not to fate. But to the cracks that let the light in. Because that's where the truth had been waiting all along.